been active for a long time. I think it was mainly I had too much to do and sort of put YouTube right on the back burner. I took down pretty much all of my content because I just didn't have the time to interact, and I needed to have a good rethink about if I was going to publish videos again, what I'm going to do. So this is me sort of making a video to try and gauge what I can do in the future, and see just how much interaction I tend to get. But yeah, there's just been a lot going on over the past couple of years where I just had to abandon YouTube basically, and YouTube has been a bit ruthless as regards like video takedowns. It's not the platform it used to be, sadly. But anyway, sorry, I just wanted to see if the internet was still working. So what have I been into? What's worth talking about? Well, I've still been doing philosophy, obviously. So one of the main questions is where does philosophy shine the most? And I think that it has most relevance when it comes to law. There's a really good book that I bought, I don't know, about 3 years ago. It's written by Larry May. It's about, it's called Genocide and a Normative Account. And it's basically evaluating how genocide is perceived in the law, how it should be approached by lawyers and prosecutors alike. It's a really good read. It's a very easy to follow book. It's I think where it gets interesting for me, there's a lot of interesting chapters, but the one section that really got my attention was the way in which the Genocide Convention was formed, pretty much to use the Holocaust as a kind of measuring stick for what we mean by genocide. So there's a number of problems with that he goes. Sorry, there's flies everywhere. That he goes through to explain that the Holocaust has very unique features that are not really present in other genocides. By other genocides, we're just going to juxtapose. We're just going to put it next to another genocide, the Rwandan genocide, for example, in order to show those differences. So the main difference between the Rwandan genocide and the Holocaust, which he points out, is the amount of central planning that was involved in the Holocaust. So this was there's plenty of evidence that shows meticulous planning over a very long period of time by the state on how to exterminate groups of people, ranging from Jewish people to Romani to homosexuals or even communists. There was quite a wide range. Meticulous plans of how that would be done, infrastructure that was put into place specifically for extermination of groups, destruction of groups, and the fact that the victims were brought to the perpetrators to be exterminated, and also on such an industrialized scale. So that's what makes the Holocaust quite unique from other genocides. It's the fact that it's got such meticulous planning, and the primary responsibility is quite obviously the Nazi regime and Adolf Hitler. and anyone associated in that regime are the primary perpetrators. Because ultimately, what Larry May opens the whole book with is that genocide is the only crime in the world that is known as a collective crime. So every other crime is where you can say, right, this is individually responsible. This is a criminal act of an individual. For example, murder is a criminal act that is perpetrated by an individual. Even persecution is something that's seen as a criminal act that's perpetrated by an individual, by individuals onto other individuals. But genocide is a collective crime. And so there are people who are initiators, inciters, planners, and actual perpetrators of the genocide. So some people don't have to even kill other people to be convicted of genocide. They just have to be a part of the planning. So that's what makes it unique in the law. And so when you compare the Holocaust to, say, the Rwandan genocide, you can say most definitely, there was a fire which a fire which just needed the slightest bit of petrol thrown onto it and it turned into a forest fire. You could definitely say that there were certain conditions there that were ready for it to go. And there was definitely incitement, and there was initiation. But what you can't say is that it was meticulously planned centrally, really. And so basically the Rwandan genocide involved neighbors, your friends, your family. They just turn up at your door and they'd be ready to kill you, the Hutus and the Tutsis. So it could have been anyone. It wasn't necessarily just like the military forces. It could be anybody. So it was kind of, I think what it raises is how the Hutus and the Rwandan people in general, you could say, well, they have been subjected to colonial rule by the Belgians and the French, and I think at some point even the Germans. And when you look at the build up to it, there's a shift from the Tutsis being the ones who have the most power as some kind of aristocracy, and the Hutus as like a subordinate class, to the Hutus gaining the majority, primarily because they weren't educated as much as the Tutsis, and the Tutsis were talking about communism, and of course the church and Europe didn't want to know about that. They didn't want that to be the case. So in all of the division, divide and conquer, and colonial rule, you had all these conditions where basically if you just tell somebody to do something like that, they just do it. Those conditions were there. But what it raises is, well, who's responsible? Criminal responsibility. Because the problem is, if you do say that the colonial imperial powers were the ones who set the conditions, then you're kind of belittling the acts of the perpetrators themselves, the ones who actually went out and killed. It makes them sound like they're just accomplices, They're just the getaway driver, not the person that's robbed the bank, you know. So again, with genocide being a collective crime, it only makes sense with those people to say that they're murderers, you know, that they should be convicted of murder rather than genocide when you talk about it in a domestic sense, you know. So yeah, it's an interesting read, and I've also been doing a course on law, which again brings up this issue about criminal responsibility. So it starts to talk about neuroscience, fMRI, etc., and in regards to trying to figure out, you know, what happens in your brain when you commit a criminal act, an indictable offence, and with intent. But also, we want to know, is it how do you draw the line on responsibility? In which it gives a couple of examples. One of them being about addiction. You know, you can say, well, someone who's addicted to drugs and then commits crimes like theft and burglary, we tend to have some sort of stigma towards people who use drugs and end up doing those things. But in actual fact, when you look at the brain chemistry and the way that abused substances can alter your brain chemistry to the point where really you haven't got much control left in there, you know. But the fact that you can sort of choose whether or not you started to take those substances tends to be the deciding factor on where we say yes, those people are guilty and they can't use an insanity defense. And you know, they're responsible. So but the other example was a bit more complicated, but one I don't think is that difficult to resolve. So if you've got someone there was a case study of a sleepwalker, and there was also one of a paedophile. So the paedophile one first, actually, because it's the most one of the more difficult ones. So basically, the guy was a teacher, and he started to molest kids at the school. Okay, so he started to commit sexual offences against students, and he was removed from the school. He was convicted, but while he was in custody, he had these fits and headaches, and they took him for an MRI scan, and they found a brain tumour in a part of the brain that I can't remember what it's called, probably somewhere near the frontal cortex, that could have produced those, you know, this lack of inhibition and behaviour. And so once it started with him looking at child porn, and then it escalated. And so once they removed the tumour, the behaviour stopped. All the desire and drive to do that sort of thing, you know, just went. So, but then a few months later, or perhaps a couple of years later, the tumour re-emerged and the behaviour started again. He started looking at child porn, and the tumour was removed again, and immediately it stopped. Now, is that person responsible? I mean, it's difficult to say, because we're not mind readers, are we? So, like, who's to know whether the guy, you know, had those impulses and put himself in a position as a teacher, and then all of a sudden the tumours, the forest fire that started in his mind and led to a change in his behaviour that was could possibly have already have been there. We don't know, but it was enough for a lack of, not being able to bring a judgment beyond the reasonable doubt that this person was guilty, and that you could make an insanity plea. So, but the other question is whether or not that's, it's a just decision, because I'm sure, like, you talk to the victims' parents and the victims themselves, and you say, oh, it's all right, he just had a lump on his brain. Oh, okay, that's fine, thanks for telling me. It's clearly not going to really bring them much closure, because there's been harm done. So then that brings me on to the other example, which is the sleepwalker. So there was a guy who got up in the middle of the night, got in his car and drove, I think, don't quote me on this if you find the case, I think it was about 20 miles. He drove 20 miles while sleepwalking, while sleep driving, to his mother-in-law and his father-in-law's house, that he was supposed to go there the day after to take them on holiday or something like that. He was supposed to do something with them the next day. And he murdered them. He shot them. He stabbed them in the sleep, and then sort of snapped out of it while he was there. Saw himself covered in blood. Realised something's not right here. So he handed himself into the police and said, "I think I've done something terrible." And he was monitored in custody by a neurologist over a period of time. I can't remember what it was. It was either a week or a month or so, and they wanted to see if there was signs of sleepwalking. There's certain breathing patterns and things that they're going to look for that would indicate that he's telling the truth, that he did in fact just sleepwalk and go to his mother and father-in-law's house in the middle of the night and just murdered them. So he was basically living out some sort of dream potentially, and it turned out he was telling the truth. In that regard, the person's definitely like, he went to bed. It wasn't like he was trying to put himself in a position where he was going to do harm. So it's very difficult to say that person is criminally responsible, because there was no intent. It wasn't like he drove to the house, then fell asleep, then woke up and murdered them. So yeah, what do you think? Subjects that I might be able to pursue further. I haven't made videos in such a long time that I've sort of forgotten how to do it, and I thought the only way that I can get the ball rolling again is to just turn the camera on and start talking. So I've got like three different things there as regards responsibility and genocide. How do we say people can be responsible when other people might be planning or inciting something, but they might have preconditions there that would basically lead to no other outcome. But at the same time, how do you ascertain guilt and responsibility without belittling, the acts that have been committed by people? The same goes for the fMRI with the brain tumor and the paedophile. To what extent can you say that person had no intent whatsoever prior to the brain tumor? What do you think? Leave your comments and I'll reply when I get time, and hopefully I will be back in production. Okay, all right, I guess that'll do.